This is how it is. These are the different small topics in your syllabus. I would like to compile them into one single kind of lecture like this. Especially for mechanical engineering students, this will be very useful. I remember talking to some of your seniors, the X-ray diffraction and all. So when I talked about atomic planes, X-ray going from one plane to other plane, like getting reflected. One person was asking, um, how can it penetrate the second wave when there are multiple grains? So you can imagine, some of you can sense the absurdity in this question. Okay, so it is generally not comprehended. People have to think about what is the dimensions that we are talking about when we talk about atomic planes. When we talk about grains, what do we mean? What is the connection between these two? Those things are not easily familiar. Those tiny concepts are separately learned, but there should be a coherent comprehension when you actually understand the different things in metallurgy. So that is another motivation for making this kind of a lecture. Okay, so let us start. Various physical metallurgy concepts like phase, component, solubility, etc. will be covered in this. You might have seen, one of the faculties at least would have shown this, materials tetrahedron. This is like, this explains everything in metallurgy. Any work in metallurgy can be somehow mapped into one of these things. Okay, the performance is what generally any engineer bothers about. Performance of a material in application. Okay, so to achieve certain performance, we need to define, we need to find materials with certain properties. Okay, so to achieve certain properties, we have to tailor the microstructure accordingly. That is what the structure is. Okay, so to achieve the required performance, we need to choose the material with required properties. To get required properties, we need to tailor the microstructure. How to tailor the microstructure is by doing a different processing to the material. Of course, the composition selection also is critical. Some of the materials tetrahedron will have composition selection along with the microstructure. In some cases, it is put in the processing part. I personally would like to put it in the processing part because selecting the microstructure and getting the right composition also is a process. Okay, so I will put it there. So getting the right composition and do the right process to get the right microstructure to achieve the right properties so that you achieve the performance that you need. So this is where all the metallurgical activities can be somehow mapped. Okay. The same thing I'm putting in a slightly different way. The right extreme is the performance, which is decided by the last but second properties, which is decided by the microstructure, which is decided by processing. So this is also the same thing. I have put slightly more details about each of these things. Maybe you can go through this. I will also share this video later anyway. Anyone has anything to ask?
Sir, I can see only the first slide, sir.
I have just changed the slide. Maybe it will take some time. Is it visible now?
And sir, for me, I think your video and also the presentation is stuck, sir.
Yes, sir, for me also.
Okay.
I can hear your voice, but I can't see you moving also.
Okay. Now you are seeing something?
No, sir.
Microstructure. It take a lot of effort for me later. Redo all the calculations.
Also, we are not seeing in presentation mode, sir.
Yeah. That is when I went out. Maybe that is connecting to you. When I enter into presentation mode, it is not coming for you possibly. Just a minute. I will try to share my entire screen and then try. Let me see. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Possibly it's a glitch in the Google Meet only. I am trying to share only my presentation file, and that happens, it is a problem. I'm sharing my entire screen now. Now it is working. Okay, I am also learning something. So this is a component. Okay, so you take any engineering component like this or any metal piece that you want to analyze, cut it and polish it like this. You can see the top surface is a polished surface of a metal. Okay, this is how you prepare a sample. Since you people have not done much of experiments, I'm just starting from here. Then put it under microscope. What you will see? You will see something like this. For example, these are grains. Okay, so you know this possibly. And here you see two different colors, black and white, but still black grains and white grains. What are these? Grains is for sure, but in one case it is in one color, in the other case it is in two colors. What does that mean? Can anyone answer?
Different phases.
Yeah.
Different crystals.
There is a small issue. Okay, different phases is the right answer. Different crystals is applicable even in the left hand side. There is a complete white color with just grain boundaries. In that also you can see different grains. Each grain is a crystal. Okay, and in the right side you see two different shades which belong to two different phase, which means in the left side it is only a single phase with multiple grains. In the right side it is two phases with multiple grains. So that is grains of one phase. The right side one is grains of two phases. Okay. And what is this? The third one. How many phases are there?
One.
One. Do you think the lines that you see are grain boundaries?
No, sir.
There also second phase, like the black one in the middle, that is also second phase, but it is in a different morphology. Okay, so morphology means shape, size, and distribution. Okay, so that is different for the second phase in this case. The first phase is anyway the gray matrix sort of phase, the background. On top of that, there are black lines. The black lines are second phase. Okay, it's not the grain boundary, it's a second phase. So now we see grains of two phases, but morphology is different. The grain shape for the black phase is different. It's like a elongated needle sort of phase. Okay, so that is the reason why you see this kind of morphology. Fine. So this is what you observe in microstructure. So we talked so much about microstructure just before this slide, and that is the central one about materials engineers, because performance or properties are something that every mechanical engineer hears about. The processing part also, heat treatment, forging, rolling, all those things also somehow you might have heard as mechanical engineers. But microstructure is not something that you would have dealt in detail. That is the bread and butter of a metallurgist. Okay, so that's what you will be learning mostly in this course or any other course in metallurgy. All the courses are centered around microstructure. If you have keenly observed that, you would have noticed it. So every course has a very significant focus on microstructure. Okay, so in microstructure, these are the different things: grains, phase, morphology, and so on. Okay, we will try to understand what is this grains and phase in the next slides. So one slide for grain. Grains are also called crystals, has atoms arranged in a particular order called crystal structure. Okay, so if you take this first microstructure, you have a grain. Inside a grain, what is there? Atoms are arranged in a very ordered manner, like this. For example, BCC is the crystal structure we say. So atoms are arranged in a particular manner. You can actually break this brick by brick. Each brick is a unit cell. Okay, so unit cell is something that you have been studying from your school level possibly. So this is what it is. Unit cell is a small part of a big three-dimensional array of atoms, which is also called lattice structure, and that is there inside a grain. Okay, so this understanding also should be there for you. These are different crystal structures, FCC and HCP. Fine. So you have heard about all these things already. BCC can look like this. You have only lattice points here, but actually it will be filled by atoms. So you can consider atoms like spheres. So therefore in body center there is a big sphere. 8 corners, you see big spheres, but only 1/8 you are seeing, because it is cut into a cube here. That is why. So this is how actually atoms are packed. They will be touching each other. like this. So this is about grains. So when people talk about unit cells, your mind should drain down into this kind of thing. You see a microstructure, and inside that there are several grains. In each grain there are different, I mean, maybe millions of atoms arranged like this, and their arrangement can be figured out just by looking at one unit cell. If you start repeating the unit cell, you will get the entire grain. Okay. What is the difference between one grain and the other grain? Can anybody tell? If it is a single phase, all the grains are BCC. That is also understandable. What is the difference then between one grain to the other grain?
Orientation.
Yes. So orientation difference is there. When you talk about orientation, you can see from the unit cell, we can define all the orientation. We can put this in a Cartesian coordinate, figure out all the lines and planes. Then we can talk about orientations. So 111 plane for this grain possibly is in the horizontal direction. For the next grain, it may be in a 45-degree direction. Something like that. There is a orientation difference. And at the grain boundary, what is the problem? What is grain boundary? Mismatch. What is the other answer?
High energy.
High energy. That is right. Why high energy?
Because disorder.
Disorder. Exactly. Disorder is the answer. There is no atomic arrangement. There will be few atoms aligned all through this, I mean, present all through the grain boundary, but they will not be having any BCC, FCC or HCP structure. Okay, so they will be randomly arranged. You heard about amorphous materials. What is the crystal structure for them?
No crystal structure.
Yeah. So they are like glasses. There is no crystal structure. There is no grain to talk about as such. So amorphous material will not have these grains and grain boundary kind of arrangement. Atoms will be totally randomly packed. That packing is called dense random packing. Okay, so that's a different kind of packing. Fine, that is about amorphous material. So about grains, you got some, what to say, these ideas you would have studied as you are answering all the questions. You have studied this, that is very clear. But only thing is you have to integrate it. When people talk about unit cell planes and directions, your mind should be inside the grain. Okay, so that's what I wanted to emphasize here. So what is an amorphous material is also something that I asked already. So now we will talk about phase. Okay, start with the common notions. Something that mechanical engineers also know. Material or a substance can exist in solid, liquid or gas state. Change of a substance from one phase to another or one state to another is phase transformation. So this is the common notion, but there is much more. Imagine a glass of water. It is a single phase. It's a compound. That is also something that you all know, H2O. Okay. And imagine a spoon of sugar, which is also a single phase, and it is also a compound. The formula is C12H22O11. Sucrose, we call it, the common sugar. Okay. What happens when we mix it? We form a solution, right? Is this solution a single phase or is it a two phase? Can anyone tell that?
Sir, within the solubility limit, it will be single phase.
Within the solubility limit, it will be a single phase. Exactly. So you get a solution which is a single phase. Let's add more sugar. Beyond a point, sugar starts precipitating. Okay. So now it is a two-phase system. Why? Because water can take only up to a certain amount of sugar into it and dissolve it. If you add anything more than that, that sugar is not going to dissolve. It is going to stay as it is. So that is the precipitate that we see here. Okay. So now the solution has become something else. It is called a saturated solution because it cannot take any more solute into that. Okay. So in this case, water is the solvent, sugar is the solute. Okay. So the solute amount is saturated in the solvent. That is why the solution cannot take more sugar into that. So that is saturated solution. and sugar stays as a separate phase. That is the two-phase system. Okay. So now you got some idea about what is phase. This is the bookish definition: physically distinct, chemically homogeneous, mechanically separable. These are the attributes of a phase. Physically distinct is something that you can see now. The reason why I'm choosing this glass is also to emphasis on this point. I mean, the understanding will be slightly easier with this example. Physically distinct is also something that you see directly now. Chemically homogeneous is all the sugar within that has C12H22O11 formula. The second phase I'm talking about. And the first phase, which is the solution, it has some saturated amount of sugar which is uniformly distributed all through the solution. Okay, so that is why it is chemically homogeneous. Okay, then mechanically separable. These two things are, of course, you can see directly mechanically separable. We can pour out the water, take out the sugar, or vice versa. We can do that. Okay, so removing sugar or water separately out is easier here. So that is mechanically separable. This is possible even in the microstructure that I shown you initially, two-phase system, the black and white kind of microstructure. In that also this definition can be applied: physically distinct, chemically homogeneous, and mechanically separable. Okay, so this is the bookish definition. But I would urge you to think more in terms of the answer one of you told. Okay, a solution is a single phase. When solvent and solute are separately present as sugar and water, that is also single phase. When they mix, that is a single phase. But when it is getting saturated, that is when it cannot take any more solute. And when you add solute at that time, it will become a second phase. Okay. So now solution and sugar are present as two-phase system. With this, we are going to understand much more in this particular presentation. So keep this in mind. The information about the compound is it has a fixed composition. Okay, both water and sugar separately, they have a fixed composition: 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. There is no compromise. You cannot adjust as H 1.9 and O. You cannot do that. So it has to be 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. Similarly, C12H22O11. So that is a compound which has fixed composition. But for the solution, which is also a single phase, it has no fixed composition. It has a range of composition. 0 to 220 gram of sugar can be dissolved in 100 ml of water at room temperature. Okay, which means whether it is 1 gram, 100 gram, 200 gram, or 220 gram, whatever it is, whatever is the amount of sugar, all that is a single phase solution. Okay. Now I'll talk about something slightly deeper, which is the scale of dissolution. What do I mean by this? You see this figure. This sugar crystal is written here. So there is some complex molecules which are closely arranged. This is the sugar crystal. So inside one sugar crystal, small cube that we see, you will have millions of molecules like this. Each molecule is C12H22O11. Okay, that so many atoms are packed in one molecule. So when you put it in water molecules are there surrounding. You can see 2 white dots and a red dot, which is H2O. Okay, so H2O molecules are around. When the sugar cube is added into water, molecule by molecule, the sugar molecules go and dissolve into the H2O atmosphere. You can see here one H2O molecule, one sugar molecule is surrounded by H2O molecules. So this is what happens when sugar dissolves in water. So what is the level of dissolution or the scale of dissolution here? It is called molecular scale dissolution. What are the attributes of this? In the sugar water solution, individual solute, which is the sugar molecule, among water, which are the solvent molecules. So this is how it is. Individual molecules present in the solvent atmosphere. That is what a molecular level dissolution is. The important thing to note here is that molecules do not dissociate. The C12H22O11 does not dissociate into carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, it is remaining as molecule. That is why it is called molecular scale dissolution. Okay. Other example is this. I will tell what is this. Possibly this is not visible to you. This is Na plus. The purple one is Na plus. The green one is a chromium minus, which is NaCl crystal, the common salt. Okay. So this is the common salt crystal, one small grain of salt. When that is put into water, you can see red dot and blue dot, which is H2O. So the moment you put it, what happens is chromium ions and sodium ions go out individually into the water. So water molecules surround chromium as well as sodium. So these are ions. Basically, atoms are getting separated. We cannot call these as atoms since they are charged. So they are ions. Okay. So in this case, it is atomic level dissolution or ionic level dissolution to be precise. But for the metallurgy systems understanding, this atomic scale dissolution is going to be much more common. Okay. So this is how most of the things that we see in alloys will be. That will be atomic level dissolution. So in the salt water solution, individual chlorine or sodium solute ions among water molecules are present. So molecules do dissociate in this case. NaCl dissociates into chromium and sodium. Now we will talk about solid solutions. This is more into the metallurgy that we require. Okay. So now you see this all white dots here. All these white dots, they are nickel atoms. Okay. And the gray atoms are copper atoms. So you can see this is a particular plane, something like the front face of unit cell, FCC unit cell. Nickel is FCC metal, copper is also FCC metal. Crystal structure of common metals is something that you should memorize, maybe 10 to 15 cases, so that if you memorize, it will be easier for you to understand many things in metallurgy in a fast way. Okay, so nickel has this kind of atomic arrangement in one plane, 100 plane, let's say. And if copper is added to that, small amount of copper, it goes and sits in a place where nickel should be sitting. So this is a substitutional solid solution, we say. So nickel dissolved in copper is a substitutional solid solution. Again, it is an atomic level dissolution. You can sense that copper chunk, when it is added to nickel, let's say we mix it in the liquid state and then solidify it. What happens is the copper chunk, which is having all the copper atoms tightly packed, releases copper atoms one by one so that it dissolves into the nickel lattice. So now you have another type of solution. In this case, solvent atoms, the big white atoms, are iron, and the solute atoms are carbon, which are very small, and they are sitting just in the crevices between the iron atoms. It does not come and replace iron as copper did to nickel. Carbon does not replace iron atom and sit. It just goes and sits in the voids. Okay, these are interstitial voids. When a solute it sits like this, it is called an interstitial solid solution. Okay, so carbon in iron is an interstitial solid solution. So these are two different types of solid solutions. So individual solute atoms among the solvent atoms. This is what happens here. So here the level of dissolution is atomic. This is another important thing. Just like in the sugar solution, we have seen that 0 to 220 grams, anything in between that is one single phase, the solution. Here also the same concept is applicable. Here it has a range of solubility. For copper in nickel, for example, the solubility is very, very high. Of course, solubility depends on temperature. We'll talk about that in the next slide. 0 to 100% is the solubility of copper and nickel. What do I mean by this? You can keep adding copper to nickel. It will not get precipitated out. Okay, this is true for most of the temperatures which are slightly above to maybe 200 degrees or so. Okay, so throughout all the temperature till the melting point, copper and nickel can dissolve in each other without any precipitation. Okay, so that is called an isomorphous system. That is another name, special name for that. It's called an isomorphous system, which means atoms like each other. They get dissolved into each other's matrix without precipitation. So in case of carbon in iron, especially when iron is in FCC crystal structure, which is called austenite phase, in that up to 2% of carbon can dissolve. But that is not true for all the temperatures. Only at a particular temperature it is up to 2%. As temperature varies, this amount will decrease, but it will be a range of composition. It's not a single composition. Okay. So either 0.1% carbon or 0.5% carbon, it is still the same interstitial solid solution of carbon in iron. So this is one of the most important points. Solutions have random mixing. Okay. So when we talk about carbon atom coming and sitting in the interstitial sites of iron, or copper atom replacing nickel atoms, in both the cases, we are not specifying that the solute should come and sit only at this place. Copper should replace only this nickel atom, not the other nickel atom. That kind of restriction is not there. Copper is free to go and sit in any of the nickel sites. It has to sit in the nickel site alone. That's all. But other than that, there is no restriction. It can sit anywhere. That is the randomness that we are talking about. Same thing is applicable to carbon. Carbon can sit in any interstitial site. There is no restriction for that. Why I am telling this now is because the next concept that we are going to learn is intermetallic compounds. There is a specific site at which the solute has to come and sit. In fact, talking in terms of solute and solvent also is not valid there. You can say minor amount of something, major amount of something, but still that is not having any random mixing. There is a particular way in which atoms should mix. Let us see that. That is intermetallic phase. Okay. It has a fixed composition, first of all, like H2O or the sucrose molecule. It has a fixed composition. For example, Fe3C, the cementite phase in iron carbide diagram. Okay. This is the crystal structure of that. The big atoms are iron. The small atom is carbon. Okay. You can see for 3 iron atoms, there is 1 carbon atom. You can count that. The big atoms 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So 6 big atoms and 2 small atoms. They are like a molecule. So here the unit cell is cut in such a way that you are seeing like this. But the pattern is repeatable. You see the 2 atoms which are in the top in the left side. Similarly, 2 atoms are there in the bottom of the right side. Again, these 4 atoms are there in the left side and 4 atoms are there in the top of the right side. So like that, what is the takeaway from this structure is there are 3 iron atoms attached to 1 carbon atom. The lines that you see may be joined like this. It does not mean that that we are trying to show a molecule there. It's a crystal structure line. So don't bother about that. What you have to see here is for every 3 iron atom, there is a carbon atom at a particular direction with a particular angle. Okay, like a covalent bond. Okay, so that is how it is. It is not a truly metallic bond. There is some covalent nature here. In the solid solution, if you talk about bonds, it is only metallic bond. There is no ionic or covalent bond there. But here you have some covalent character. Okay. So that is where the directionality comes into picture. 3 iron and 1 carbon should be arranged in this particular manner. This crystal structure, you might have studied it. It's an orthorhombic crystal structure. So this is an intermetallic compound, Fe3C. So you can see how different it is from a solid solution. Okay. So it has a particular chemical order also. Intermetallic phases have chemical order. By the word chemical order, I mean chemical species have certain particular way of arrangement. Chemical species is nothing but elements here, iron and carbon. Okay, the periodic table elements are all called chemical species here. Okay, so the chemical order is present here, which is not a random mixing. So we cannot talk about mixing and all here. Okay, so carbon is added to iron, but when the composition is right, 3 iron and 1 carbon will join together and form this kind of phase. Okay, so this is an intermetallic compound. So in solid alloys, these are the commonly encountered phases. Solid solutions, intermetallic compounds. These 2 things we have seen. Intermediate phases are something in between, but more like intermetallic compound. Okay. The solid solutions are totally random. There is a range of composition. Intermetallic compounds are strictly single compositions. Intermediate phase is something that has a chemical order, like intermetallic compound. but it does not have a single fixed composition. It has a small range of composition. So you understand the difference now. That is called intermediate phases. But why I said it is more like intermetallic compound is because it has that chemical order. As long as that is there, we can say it is more like an intermetallic compound. In fact, putting together intermetallic compounds and intermediate phases, they are called intermetallics. So it's a common name for both these phases. Okay. So there are many branches to this, like electron compound, Hume-Rothery compound, and so on. But at this level, you can have these three categories in your mind, which is good enough. Okay. So now we will come back to the same example. We will understand what is meant by a component. Okay. Component is chemical species of fixed composition. Okay. So we have seen H2O as a compound. It has a fixed composition. Can we say that as a chemical species? Yes, we can say that as a chemical species. H2O and sucrose molecule. Okay. So those are components now. But it is more of a matter of convenience. I'll tell you why. Solution of sucrose in H2O. So in this case, what is the component? H2O and sucrose, these two things. Understandable. What about formation of H2O from its elements like hydrogen and oxygen? What are the components in that reaction? When oxygen and hydrogen join together to form H2O, what are the components there? There, the elements are components. Okay. Then about formation of sucrose from elements, components are all the three: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So you see, in one case, we talked about a solution where components are already compounds. Two compounds are forming a solution. Okay. But when we talk about formation reaction of something, the components are elements. So now you can imagine about the solid solutions that we talked about. In the solid solutions, we had two elements mixing. Okay. So their components are those two elements, nickel and copper, for example. Those two elements are components there. Okay, so it's a very, very basic concept, but there is a certain difference that you need to focus on. Okay, molecules can be components, and these individual elemental atoms can also be components. It is a matter of convenience. So depending on what kind of process that you study, whether it is solution formation or formation of a compound or formation of a solid solution, depending on the what is your end result, you have to decide which things are going in to form this particular product. So which things are going in, those are the components. Okay. So now I removed that word chemical here from the top. Species of fixed composition. Why I removed that chemical is because since I am doing the computational thermodynamics and predicting phase diagrams and all, in that we used to model phases where vacancy is a species. Okay. Or a charge is a species, something like that. So there it's not exactly chemical species, but in some way it is an entity which can be called as a species. Okay, so it's not a strict definition, I would say. Chemical species need not be there. Species of fixed composition is fine. Vacancy is zero of any element. So 0% of any element is a fixed composition in some way, right? So using the word chemical is somehow not completely inclusive definition, I would say. Okay, so species of fixed composition is fine. So now we can talk about the things like unary, binary, ternary, quaternary, quinary, hexanary, septenary, and so on. Okay, what are these? The number of components in each system is going to get a name for the system. So entire system is named based on what are the number of components in that. Okay, if it is a single component system, it is a unary system. For two component binary system, and so on. Possibly beyond ternary, you might not have seen quaternary, quinary, hexanary, and septenary for 4, 5, 6, and 7 elements. And there are much more. The modern alloys usually have even 13 elements, 11 elements, and all. But usually for beyond 4-5 elements, they are not in concentrated amount. The extra elements might be like less than 1% or 2%, something like that. Okay. So seriously, when you consider this kind of names, you talk about phase diagrams. When you want to talk about phase diagrams, you talk about a concentrated regime, like 5% or 30% of each element, something like that. Okay, so in that case, these kind of names will be useful, especially in the area called the high entropy alloys, which is a hot research area now. There, this kind of diagrams are used, higher order diagrams, we call it. So this is a question: is component a single phase? So you can sense now sugar. We already told it's a single phase, and now we talked about sugar as being a component in solution making. Okay, so a component can be a single phase. Similarly, when you talk about copper pure element, nickel pure element, they are components, and when they are pure as a single chunk metal, that is also a phase, right? Single phase of pure element. Okay, so component can be a phase, but a solution which is a phase, single phase, is not a single component. There are two components in that. So you see this difference. I hope I am not confusing you too much in this. We will talk about the phase equilibria now. This is there in the course title itself. It could have been something different, but it is okay. It's an acceptable name. So let's consider 100 gram sugar in 100 ml water. What are the phases present? Can anyone tell? 100 gram sugar in 100 ml water.
Solutions.
Solution, single solution. That's right. So we have only one phase, which is single phase, that is in equilibrium. Okay. By the word equilibrium, what I mean is something is stable. Okay. So now a single phase is stable. We can say that single phase is in equilibrium. Okay. So phase equilibria is this. One phase is in equilibrium, as simple as that. Okay. Now, when we add 230 grams in 100 ml, I already told only 220 grams can be accommodated by water at room temperature. So if we add 230 grams, what are the phases?
Two phases, sir.
Exactly. So we have a two-phase system. Saturated solution and sugar. Now we can say two phases are in equilibrium. Okay. So the word phase equilibria is this: how many phases are in equilibrium, or how many phases are present in a microstructure. Okay. If it is a single phase, it's a single phase equilibrium. Multi-phase means multi-phase equilibria. Equilibria is the plural term for equilibrium. Okay. So this phase equilibria is affected by three things. There can be several different conditions that are available in thermodynamics, but we can stick to these three. These three are commonly used. In fact, pressure is not a big bothering in solid state or liquid state. When gas is involved, only then pressure matters. The composition and temperature are going to affect the phase equilibria, which means it is going to affect the what kind of phases will be in equilibrium in a microstructure. When microstructure is affected, you know what will happen to the properties and performance. So how this phase equilibria is affected by composition and temperature is something of our interest now. We will get a small introduction to these ideas now. Okay, so this thing, overall composition is changing in these two cases. In the first case, only 100 gram sugar is added in 100 ml water. We had a single phase. When the amount of sugar is increased beyond 220, we started having two phases. Okay, so what is the change we did? We did not change the pressure. Atmospheric pressure is the only thing. We did not change the temperature as well. We are keeping it at the room temperature, but the overall composition is changed. So when the composition is changed, you see the phase equilibria changes. Okay. When you have a single phase, let's say 100 gram sugar in 100 ml water, in that case, the phase equilibria is single phase. The moment you increase the sugar to 110, let's say, in that case also it will be a single phase, but there is a difference between these two. What is the difference? The composition of the sugar solution is different. Initially it had only 100 grams. Now it has more than 100 grams. So there is a change in the composition of the single phase. So when that means single phase is stable in the overall equilibria, there is only one phase, but the composition of that phase is varying. That is also a microstructural factor. Okay, so you may have single phase and you will measure some property for that. You will think this is the strength of this single phase, but that single phase can be a solution, which means it can have a range of solubility. Then if you change the composition of that slightly, the solution is going to remain as such. It is going to look like a single phase, but the property may be slightly different because the amount of solute that you added is changed now. Okay, so from 100 gram, if you add 100, if you make it 110 and measure the properties, it will be slightly different, although only single phase is stable. Okay, so you can sense the composition of individual phase matters. Okay, so in the second case, we have these two phases, solution and sugar separately. The solution has 220 gram in 100 ml. The remaining 10 grams which we added extra is staying as sucrose, which is the precipitate. Okay, we will start with this to understand the composition. We will understand two terms here. What is overall composition? What is individual phase composition? So you might have sensed it already in the previous slide. Composition of individual phases in terms of components, we have to give this. Okay, what does that mean? That means we have 220 gram of sugar in 100 ml water. What is the percentage of sugar and what is the percentage of H2O? We have to convert this into some percentage and report. That is what composition is. Okay, so let's say X percentage of sugar is there. What does that mean? 100 minus X percentage of H2O will be there. That's all. So X is the only, it's a single value, but that is good enough to define both the elements. I mean, both the components, I would say. So one value, one data is enough to define the composition for a binary system. Okay, so binary composition is just a one component data. If you tell the amount of one component, automatically the other component gets fixed, 100 minus that value. Okay, for the second phase, the precipitate phase, 10 grams and the entire 10 grams is only sugar, nothing else. So in terms of composition, it is 100% sugar only. There is no H2O in the precipitate. Okay, so this is how you should report a composition. Overall composition, you have to tell like this. So 230 gram in 100 ml. That's what we have in the entire vessel, right? Entire glass has 230 grams of water, sugar. So that means there is a percentage that we can report. Y percentage of sugar and some 100 minus Y percentage of water. Okay, that's what the overall composition is. So that is different from individual phase composition. I hope you get this difference. So I repeat once again, solution is 220 grams in 100 ml. Okay, which is saturated. It cannot take more sugar than this. Okay, that we are reporting in terms of percentage. What is the percentage of sugar and water? So there is some percentage. I'm not calculating the value. I'm just saying that there is some percentage of sugar in this solution. I'm not talking about the overall glass. I'm talking about only the solution. Okay, and there is some percentage of water in the solution. And there is also a second phase, which is the precipitated sugar, which is 100% sugar. There is no water in that. Okay, so these are compositions of individual phases. The overall composition is this, some Y percentage of sucrose, which is converting this 230 gram in 100 ml into percentage basically. Okay, so that's what it is. So there is various units in which you can report this. X percentage I have put. What is that percentage? Are you considering the volume? I'm not talking about the volume here, but volume is something that is usually taken in microscopy. Okay, in the entire volume, how much of volume is occupied by one phase, how much is occupied by the second phase? If there are three phases, how much is occupied by each phase? The volume I'm saying. In that case, it will become volume percent. Okay, so that is volume percent of elements. In terms, volume percent of phases if there are three phases present. In terms of elements, in one phase itself, there can be a couple of elements in a binary system. So what are the units that we use for that? We can use something like weight percent. Weight percent and mass percent are same. we can use something like mole percent and atomic percent. Okay, these two are same when your components happen to be elements. Okay, if they are already molecules like H2O and sucrose mixing to form a solution, if they are already molecules, then if you say 1 mole of molecule is not equal to 1 mole of atoms, because already one molecule itself has so many atoms in that, C12H22O11. Okay, so there are so many atoms in one molecule. So if you say 1 mole of one molecule, it is not equivalent to the atomic percent. So there we have to be careful. If the components are elements, there is no problem. Okay, like a nickel, copper. So you can report what is the copper's mole percent. That is equivalent to saying what is the atomic percent of copper. So both are similar. So I hope you know what is a mole. Mole is 1 Avogadro number of atoms. If some of you do not know this, I'm just confirming, I mean cautioning cautioning myself possibly. Yes, some cases this will pop up as an issue. So mole is 1 Avogadro number, that 10 power 23 number of atoms. In periodic table, you see atomic weight, right, for each of the element. For example, for iron, it is 56. Okay, 56 grams is the atomic weight of iron. What does that mean? Can one atom of iron weigh 56 grams? Atom is so small thing, right? It cannot weigh that much. So what is that 56 grams? 56 grams is something that you can feel in your hand. And that is 10 power 23 iron atoms put together, one followed by 23 zeros, such a big number. Okay, so that will have 56 grams of weight, which you can hold in your hand. Okay, so that these two are like almost similar, mole percent and atomic percent. We can also represent the composition in terms of fraction. The total amount of all the elements is 1, and individual element will break that 1 into different parts. Okay, so that can come into weight fraction or mole fraction or atomic fraction. Okay, so the left hand side things are with respect to weight or mass. The right hand side are with respect to number of atoms or number of moles. Okay, so these are the ways in which you can represent composition. So when composition varies, phase equilibria changes. That I already explained. That is how important composition is, especially the overall composition. So now we'll see about the effect of temperature. Okay. So I will just summarize a bit. What we have been doing is we have seen what is microstructure and how it is important in entire materials engineering. Okay, and in microstructure we have grains and phases and so on. We are trying to understand. We try to understand what is a grain, what is a phase. We have done that, and there can be one phase in the microstructure or more than one phase. Why is that? It is because different phases can come into equilibrium with respect to different conditions. Okay, so what are the different conditions? Composition and temperature are two important conditions. About composition, we have just seen how when changing the composition from 100 grams of sugar to 230 grams, we go from one single phase to two phase equilibrium. Okay, so phase equilibria changes with overall composition. Now what we are going to see is how temperature is affecting that. Okay, you can see here this graph is showing mass of sugar in one axis and temperature in the other axis. Okay, so what is this line? It is going up. It means when the temperature goes up, the solubility also goes up. The maximum amount of sugar that can be dissolved in water also goes up with respect to temperature. So this is a graph now. Okay, we will try to convert this into a map. How do we do that? To go there, just look at this line, this dark blue line that I've put here. You see this line is going from y-axis value 0 to 220. It is in 30 degrees Celsius, which is like room temperature. Okay, so at 30 degrees Celsius, 220 gram is where it intersects this graph. Okay, so beyond 220, it is going into going above this curve. What does that mean? It means that it will accept sugar up to this level, 0 to 220 gram. Beyond 220, it will not accept the sugar. Water will not accept the sugar. Sugar will precipitate. That's the meaning of it, right? So in this way, if you look at the graph, you are trying to make it a map. What is that? This is the map. So in maps, in world map or something that you see, what do you bother about is not a graph kind of data. It's about the location. What are your axes there? Latitude and longitude, right? So you take one latitude, one longitude and one latitude, see where they meet. And if that is your location, you tell that they are the coordinates for your location. This is how we do in the map, right? Some mass of sugar. So if that is the mass, let's say 220 grams we add, and our temperature is something like 100 degrees Celsius, then 220 gram or let's say 230 grams, even that will be dissolved because we are in the solution zone. At 100 degrees, 230 grams is somewhere here. That will be very much inside this zone. This entire zone is solution zone. Okay, so you can tell what is the mass of sugar and what is the temperature. Then you will be able to identify whether that will be a solution or it will be a solution plus sugar. Okay, the same 30-degree case, if you add 230 grams, you will be ending up here, slightly above this line, which means you are entered into the zone of solution plus sugar. So that is a two-phase region, which means sugar will precipitate out. Okay, so this is also a way in which you can represent phase equilibria, isn't it? Changing the composition can be done directly here, and what phases will come can be seen directly here. Okay, so this is the way in which you represent what you see as a practical water solution formation, that condition, into something more scientific. This is a more scientific representation, but this is not a standard way of representation. In metallurgy we have something else. Okay, so this is a map of weight versus temperature. That is fine. So now consider these 2 points. This point is in the solution plus sugar zone, the red point here. This red point is in the solution zone. So according to your coordinates, you will end up in certain phase equilibria. This is a phase diagram. Okay, but a more standard phase diagram would be something like this. So there we need to have composition versus temperature. Okay, this is mass of a sugar is in a way composition. Okay, so mass of the sugar is in a way composition, but we know we have to represent things in percentages or mole fraction, mass fraction, something like that. That is what composition, the more standard way of referring to composition. Okay, so the mass as such doesn't stand in the standard way of phase diagrams. Temperature is, yes, yeah, you can use it in degrees Celsius or Kelvin, anything is fine. Okay, so and usually temperature will be in y-axis and composition will be in x-axis. So what we will try to do is rotate this diagram. Okay, so now you have temperature in y-axis and composition, or in this case mass, is in x-axis. So you have solution plus sugar here and simple solution here. Okay, so if you put a line here at 30 degree again, what does it mean? 0 to 220 degrees, sorry, 220 gram of sugar is in this solution range. Anything beyond that enters into solution plus sugar range. So if you keep adding sugar crossing this line from left to right, if you come, you enter in from single phase equilibria to two phase equilibria, from solution to solution plus sugar. Okay, this line is called the Salvus line. So this is an important term in phase diagrams. What is the meaning of Salvus line? It tells you with respect to temperature, what is the amount of solute that can be accommodated in a solvent to form a single phase. Okay, or solubility limit of sugar in water. Okay, that's what it is. So you can see a solution has a range of composition. That is also seen here. What is that range? Directly it can be read from here, and that range is going to shrink or increase with respect to temperature. Okay, all this information are available in the phase diagram. In the right extreme, what will be the thing? Mass of the sugar is 0. So this right extreme line is pure water line. The mass of the sugar is 0 there. Okay, and that is continuous. I mean, that is also part of this solution zone. Okay, solution zone is continuous from this solvus line to this y-axis. What does it mean? It is only H2O. H2O structure is not changed. In that, sugar is getting accommodated. Like copper is accommodated into nickel lattice to form a substitutional solid solution. Here in water, sugar is getting accommodated. Okay. So the right extreme line is part of this solution field. You need not get confused here, because when you have 0% of sugar, and if you want to call it as a solution, you can imagine what is that. It is a pure water, okay, which is part of this domain, phase domain, single phase domain. Okay. So now we will consider this dot here in the solution zone. What happens when it is slowly cooled? What is this point? It has about how much? 220, 230, something like 230 grams. Something like 230 grams of sugar is in this water. So that is a solution. And it is existing at a temperature which is 70 degrees Celsius. So at 70 degrees Celsius, 230 grams is accommodated, okay, into a solution. So when it is slowly cooled, what will happen? The temperature is going to drop. It will eventually come and meet this line. When it meets this line, it means it enters into a two-phase domain. So this is a two-phase domain, which means from this point onwards, if the temperature is decreased, let's say what is that point? About 28 or something, 28 degrees Celsius or so, it reaches this line. So if you bring it below 28 degrees Celsius, it will start precipitating sugar. So that's the meaning of it. So when you cross the solvus line, phase transformations occur. What is the transformation here? Solution is transforming into solution plus sugar. What happens when it is rapidly cooled? You come to this point, let's say about 19 degrees or 18 degrees or something. You cool it very fast to this temperature, which means at this temperature, you will be still able to see single phase solution momentarily. It will take some time for the solution to precipitate the sugar out. Okay. Because sugar precipitating from the solution takes some time. It's not that we are keeping it at one temperature and keep adding sugar so that beyond the limit it will just get precipitated. It's not that. What we are doing here is making a solution, make it stay at high temperature, keep all the solute dissolved in that solution nicely, and then bring that solution rapidly to a something like a room temperature. So what happens in that? It crosses the solvus line. Therefore, it has to precipitate something out. Okay, it has to have a two-phase equilibrium. It will not immediately have that. It will take some time for sugar to come out and as a precipitate. Okay, so here what we have is a solution which is super saturated. Okay, because it can only hold at this temperature of 18 degrees up to this much of sugar only. Okay, but we made it to accommodate more sugar just by rapidly cooling it. So it's beyond the saturation level of the solution. So it is called a super saturated solution. Okay, the level of super saturation is this much from here to here. So it has to do this precipitation. So precipitate that comes out is sugar. Okay, that is a compound. Okay, the whatever is going to remain is a saturated solution. From super saturation, it will move to saturation. That's all. Okay, so that is the process of precipitation. All these ideas, if you really understand it based on this simple example of just water and sugar, all these ideas are exactly the same applicable to the phase diagrams for metallic systems. Okay, so I will share this video also. So anywhere if you feel little shaky, you come back to this video, look at these things, understand what are the different zones in phase diagrams, so that it will be helpful. So here we will have a practical metallic system, the steel. We have steel and cast iron. We have iron carbide phase diagram. Okay, I will rather focus on one small zone and try to connect it with whatever we have learned till now. The left bottom, this zone alone, which is relevant for steel. And if some of you mechanical engineers do not know what is steel and cast iron, you can see here 0 to 2% carbon is steel, 2 to 6.67 is called cast iron. Okay, it's a very basic difference. So we will focus on the steel side now. So what you see here is, let's focus here. This alpha ferrite is written in the near the y-axis. It is shown in a small zone. Okay, so that zone is pure iron zone plus carbon. In the x-axis there is carbon. I am not showing it here. In x-axis there is carbon plus carbon getting dissolved in pure iron. Okay, so when iron accommodates carbon, you can see a small zone here, and a Salvus line kind of thing also. Okay, this line here, it goes up to the temperature of 769 degrees Celsius. It is actually 723 in some textbooks. Okay, so up to that temperature it goes up, and from that temperature onwards it goes down. I mean, the composition range of carbon in this alpha ferrite phase is going down. So you can sense what is this alpha ferrite. Alpha ferrite is a solution now. Okay, it's a solution of carbon in iron. Iron is the solvent, carbon is the solute, and only maximum of this much carbon, which is written here as 0.02%. Okay, that is the maximum amount of carbon that can be dissolved in alpha ferrite, and that too at a particular temperature, 769. Anything above or below, the carbon content, the maximum carbon content that can be accommodated will be getting lesser. Okay, which means the Salvus line is indicating what is the solubility of carbon in ferrite phase. Okay, so this is what you should keep in mind. You can also compare that here for austenite phase, which is a different phase. It's again a solution. You can see from this y-axis there is nothing in between, only the Salvus line here and here, which means the entire zone is a single phase, a solution. That solution has carbon in that, because in x-axis we are increasing carbon. This y-axis is pure iron. So in pure iron you start adding carbon, you get this austenite phase. But this exists only at this temperature range. Below this temperature you get alpha ferrite. Okay, so there are two phase regions. This two phase region is where alpha, which is ferrite, and the gamma, which is austenite. Alpha and gamma coexist here. Okay, and in this zone austenite and Fe3C coexist. So like that, there are zones in which two phases are in equilibrium or single phase is in equilibrium. Okay, so I hope you get an eye for seeing a phase diagram, and don't be intimidated by more complex phase diagrams. What you have to see is the extreme right side and left side. You see that will be like pure components. In one side there will be component A. The x-axis will be showing the how much amount of B is increasing, component B. In the right extreme it is 100% B. Okay, and you can see if there is a small zone like this, it means there is a solution of this pure element with the solute. Okay, the pure element is the solvent. Same thing is applicable to the right extreme as well. Okay, so there are different aspects to phase diagram, like all the horizontal lines means there is some reaction happening and things like that. That we will not cover here. This zone of the terminal zone, people say terminal zone is at the end of the phase diagrams. At those zones you will get to see a lot of these small zones of solutions. In some cases the solutions are there for a quite big range. Okay, like in case of nickel copper, the solution is there for the entire range. There is nothing else in between. Okay, entire range is a single solution. Like that, not many diagrams are present. In most of the diagrams you will see this kind of small solution zone. Okay, so you should get an eye to see what are the solution zones. Other than that, what else will be there is something that we can see later, and of course that is not part of our thermodynamics phase equilibria course, but if time permits I will try to cover that also. But this is a part of our course where we need to learn these concepts. Okay, to see what is solution, solvent and all. Okay, so this is another phase diagram, aluminum silicon phase diagram, just as an exercise for you to see. I am showing this. So here you see at the left hand side it is a 0 weight percent of silicon. Okay, and AL is written, which means pure aluminum is in this side. The amount of silicon in that is 0. In the right extreme, you see 100, which is weight percent of silicon, and you also see the letter Si there. So this is 100% silicon. Okay, so this diagram is between aluminum and silicon. Aluminum silicon is a very important phase diagram for many applications. Okay, aluminum 6000 series alloys are the lightweight aluminum alloys which are used in aerospace, and many applications where lightweight and strength is required, good strength is required. Okay, so this you might have heard about. Aerospace material is basically mostly aluminum. Okay, so aluminum silicon is a very important phase diagram, practically speaking. So here you have a small zone like this Salvus line going up to a temperature and then coming down, like decreasing. So this zone is labeled as Al in bracket, which means it's a solution of aluminum with silicon. Okay, and the silicon's solubility in pure aluminum is shown by this line. But anyway, that amount is not even let's say 2%. Okay, so it's only up to 2% of silicon that can be accommodated in aluminum, and that too at only one temperature. At all other temperatures, it is less than 2%. That's all. What about dissolving aluminum in silicon? In the right extreme, you see silicon straight line is there, and after that, this zone is coming. Here it is not labeled what is this zone. This zone is this aluminum bracket plus silicon bracket. That is this zone. This entire zone is a two-phase zone at the bottom. Okay, so in the silicon side, there is no Salvus line that you are able to see. What does that mean? It means that aluminum does not dissolve in silicon at all, or silicon does not accommodate aluminum at all. There is no solubility for aluminum in silicon. That's the meaning of it. Okay. So this kind of system is called a eutectic system. This reaction horizontal line is a eutectic reaction. We will not bother about it now. We will bother only about the terminal sides now. In one terminal side, you are able to see a small solubility zone, a solution of aluminum. Okay, silicon in aluminum. In the right hand side, you are not seeing anything. So there is no solubility of aluminum in silicon. Okay, that's all. What about the effect of pressure? The third thing that I talked about. For phase transformations involving only liquid and solid state, the influence of pressure is ignored in most of the practical cases. Okay, why? The reason comes even from thermodynamics. We can say there is something called Clausius-Clapeyron equation. Okay, I will try to cover that. It tells you what happens to the transformation temperatures. What do I mean by transformation temperatures? You can sense now. We have seen the phase diagrams moving from one single phase domain to a two phase domain. We cross a line, Salvus line. When we cross the line, another phase starts to precipitate, right? So that is a phase transformation. So that occurs at that particular temperature when your composition is fixed. Okay, when it meets the Salvus line, that is the temperature at which it occurs. Okay, but that temperature will differ when pressure is different. Okay, in atmospheric pressure, the diagram that we had was right for sugar and water solution. But if you change the pressure from 1 atmosphere to 2 atmosphere, the diagram may slightly vary. But will it be significant to think about a new diagram for 2 atmosphere pressure? No. 1 atmosphere to 2 atmosphere to several atmospheres is not going to matter. Only when we go to gigapascal levels, means thousands of atmospheres, that is when you start seeing real changes in liquid to solid kind of transformations, because we are all after in a non-compressible substances. So this you might have heard. Okay, compressible, non-compressible. So that you might have heard. So solids and liquids are not compressible. So there is no need to bother about pressure variations of small sort. Only extreme conditions matter. So for practical cases, it is generally ignored. Nevertheless, we will see how pressure affects something for one of the systems at least now. That will be in a phase diagram for an unary system. Unary means single component. You might be able to relate now. What is the single component? It is H2O. The diagram may be familiar to you also because it has different kind of purposes in mechanical engineering as well. So pressure and temperature are in two axes. Previously, we had temperature in y-axis, composition in x-axis. That is the standard phase diagram in metallurgy. In metallurgy, we had temperature in y-axis, composition in x-axis. But here, we have pressure and temperature, pressure versus temperature. Okay, but still it is a map. It is not like a graph. There is a way the red lines can be seen like a graphs, but this is a map. When you choose a particular combination of pressure and temperature, let's say the room temperature and atmospheric pressure, you will be ending up somewhere between these points B and C, okay, where water exists, 30 degrees Celsius or something, okay. And the normal freezing point is labeled as B. Normal boiling point is labeled as C. What does that mean? You see, there are 3 zones. First of all, water is in some zone, ice is in the left hand side zone, vapor is in the bottom side zone. Okay, so there are 3 zones. The moment you cross one zone to other zone, you undergo a phase transformation. So water from room temperature, if you take and keep reducing the temperature, traveling in x-axis in the reverse direction, left hand side direction, you will meet this freezing point. What happens there? Phase transformation occurs. Water gets transformed into ice. Okay, there is no point of talking about precipitation and all here, because we don't have a two-phase system. We don't have a two component system. We have a single component, water. So water's phases, the liquid phase or solid phase, that is also called state, that is going to change. Okay, physical state of a material is going to change. So that happens here. When you increase water from room temperature to about 100 degrees, it is going to boil. So it is going to become vapor. That is also a phase transformation. Okay, but what happens in this red line? If your pressure and temperature combination is such that you end up in this red line, there you will have 2 phases in equilibrium. At point C, you will have water and vapor, both in equilibrium. Okay, it means a system can be totally stable as water. It can be totally stable as vapor. It can be totally stable as water plus vapor in some combination, some ratio of vapor, some ratio of water. That is also fine. Okay, all the 3 are possible. Complete water, complete vapor, complete water plus vapor mixture, that is also possible. Okay, but the possibility of having water and vapor together is not there beyond the red line. If you go either into water zone or vapor zone, there will be only one phase. There is a possibility of having 2 phases in equilibrium only in the red line. Okay, similarly it applies to ice plus water also. The line which is joining A and D, the red line, so that line says the equilibrium between ice and water. If your pressure temperature combination makes you end up in this line, you will have 2 phases in equilibrium. Okay, same thing applies to ice plus water also. Okay, there is a small length of red line which is between ice and vapor. Okay, so these are the what to say, phase transformation lines, we can say like that. Okay, so that those lines are called 2-phase equilibria lines in general, but when you change your pressure or temperature, those are the lines which are going to tell you whether phase transformation is going to happen or not. Okay, in the right extreme we have something called the critical point. So you might have studied this in different systems. This is useful. Very practical example if I want to give, I will take the example of what gas is compressed. LPG is also compressed, right? Liquefied petroleum gas. So some gaseous substance, which is the fuel in our household stoves, is compressed into the cylinder. How is it compressed? By increasing the pressure. So when you increase the pressure of a vapor, it is going to become a liquid. You can see in this also in the diagram, where you can take something like the point C. It is at 100 degrees Celsius. Okay, so point C, let us say we are in vapor state somewhere here in the phase diagram, and if you keep increasing the pressure, you will enter into water zone, right? So vapor becomes water as we increase the pressure when the temperature is constant. At room temperature, if you start compressing the gas, petroleum gas, it is going to become liquefied petroleum. We can pack it and sell it. Okay, so this is not possible beyond the critical point. When temperature is beyond the critical point, no matter how much pressure you increase, the vapor is not going to condense into water. Okay, or the gaseous state will not become liquidous state. So that problem will be there beyond critical point. So it's a practically very important temperature, right? So if you wish to make something liquefied and your temperature is higher than the critical point for that substance, for water fortunately it is 373. If for a material, for a substance which you want to condense, if it is beyond, if it is something around room temperature, then you have a problem. So you have to really know what is the critical point. That is a practical application of this. Then we can talk about the triple point, the point A here. What is so special about that? There, three phases can coexist: solid, liquid, and vapor, ice, water, and vapor. All the three can coexist at point A. Okay, it is also called as invariant point. So the word invariant is very useful. Unless I teach something called Gibbs phase rule, I cannot explain it now. So we will come back to Gibbs phase rule and then this idea of invariant point. So that triple point where three phases are in equilibrium is called an invariant point. The entire red lines are called monovariant points. What is this variant? Is something called the degree of freedom. That we will understand when we look at the Gibbs phase rule. So as of now, you have some idea about what is pressure versus temperature diagram for a single component. And there are different points in that. And you also get the idea of seeing the diagram as a map. For a combination of temperature and pressure, you get certain phase in equilibrium. So kind of phase equilibriums you can identify in a very quick way from a phase diagram. Yeah, invariant point, wait for Gibbs phase rule. That's all. So in this session, if you have any doubts, you can ask. We have about 15 minutes to close.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, Ranjit Reddy. Yeah.
How do you add nickel and copper, sir? How to make that solution?
Solution
Nickel,
is
copper.
generally made in industries by going into a liquid phase. Okay, usually nickel is melted, and whatever amount of copper we wish to add to that, we add that when nickel is in the liquid state. Okay, so that is
And
how
in
it is generally done.
And in iron carbon phase diagram also, ferrite is also solid. And how can we add that carbon?
Yeah, that's a good question. When you have a solid of iron, how do you add carbon so that it goes and sits in the interstitial voids? Okay, so it is actually done at the liquid state, and then it is cooled down to the temperature. When you, I just drew one line, right, from a single phase solution for cooling something rapidly or slowly to reach some other point in the phase diagram. Something like that you can imagine even in iron carbon phase diagram. At very high temperature, above the melting point of iron, 1600 degrees Celsius, something like that, you can add some carbon in that and bring the temperature down. Okay, actually it is the other way around. Practically speaking, when you make iron, it has about 5% carbon in that. I talked about 0.02% carbon in ferrite. So if you want to really achieve a pure ferrite phase, you have to reduce the carbon in that liquid from 5% to something like 0.02. So removing the carbon is the big headache in iron and steel industries. Okay, so bring the carbon down to the level that you want and then cool that liquid so that you get 100% ferrite. Okay, but generally steels have some amount of ferrite added to some amount of cementate. That is how it is. Usually the composition is for the mild steel, which you see tables and chairs everywhere, that has about 0.35 carbon. So which means it is beyond the single phase solution of alpha. You have two phases there. So alpha, which is ferrite, plus some cementate, that is a Fe3C phase. These two will be mixed in any mild steel that we see. That is the reason for its good properties also. Strength and everything that we see for a steel basically comes from this addition of carbon and this kind of phase equilibrium. So solid solutions are made in the liquid state and brought down. That is how it is generally done. Okay. There is another technique called mechanical alloying. One faculty in our school, Professor Kotishwar Rao, he has a device which has balls, solid balls of very hard balls, tungsten carbide material. That's a very hard material. So in balls made out of that material, which are like 1 centimeter in diameter, that kind of balls, they are put in a small vessel which is also made of tungsten carbide, and between some 100 balls or 50 balls are put into that vial. Okay, and along with that you add some nickel and copper, separate powders, nickel powder and copper powder, and this entire vessel is kept under something called a ball mill, and it is rotated at a very high rpm, like 300 rpms in a minute, 300 rotations. So such a high rate of revolution. Once it is done for let's say 5 hours or 10 hours, and then take the powder that you have put, pure nickel and pure copper, take it and put it under a XRD or any technique that can give you a crystal structure. You will see that the XRD pattern that you get will not match with either nickel or copper. Okay, it will be slightly different from both the pure elements that you put, which means some solution is formed. Nickel copper usually is isomorphous system, so both mixed into each other in atomic level. So atomic level dissolution would have happened. That is where we say alloying has happened. So that is a nickel copper solution, which is actually atomic level kind of solution, which is made totally in the solid state. We are not taking anything into liquid state. That is called mechanical alloying, but that is not an industry practice. Most of the mechanical alloying today is used for this kind of research only. But there are certain materials called oxide dispersion strengthened alloy. Means taking some oxide and trying to disperse it into a metal matrix so that oxides will be strengthening agents. To make this kind of thing, it is not possible in conventional method, because usually the powder that you put will have a small oxide layer on top of that. That is how it is chosen. And then this powder is milled in the ball milling, the process that I told. When it is done, what happens is all the oxide which is on top of the small powder particle is broken, and it is spread into all the entire matrix. Then this powder can be sintered, made into a solid. And if you see the microstructure of the solid, all the broken oxide pieces will be there, scattered throughout the matrix. That will be strengthening the material. Okay, that is called oxide dispersion strengthened alloy. To make this alloy, there is no other go. Mechanical alloying is the only option, even in industries. Okay, so that is the application of mechanical alloying. Just that is one method to make alloys in solid state, but industrially it is not the one for conventional alloys. Any other question? Okay. Okay, if there is no more question, we will stop. I will share the video. You can refer to it whenever you want. I will give an assignment regarding what has happened in this particular 2 hours. Okay. Okay. See you.
Yes.